Thank you all for joining the session. We are excited today. We've got some special guests. Just get my slides to advance here. We've got John Bennett joining us today. John is a principal consultant and a leader of TRC's project controls team in the UK. He is an industry expert. He's been at this for 25 years, leading project, program, portfolio management products, regardless of whether they're delivered through cloud or subscription or traditional on-site deployments. And so he's got an extensive background in providing quality IT services. So we're excited to have him with us as well. If you're not familiar with TRC companies, they're a global company offering environmental improvement support, geographical solutions, and they work to improve project delivery across the US and the UK. We also have Thomas Charlton joining us. He is founder and CEO of Goliath Technologies, also an industry vet. He's run multiple software companies with various technologies, and he's taken this industry experience and knowledge to build what you're seeing and what you'll see today is industry-leading IT EUC observability. And then, of course, we have Martin Quinnen. He's one of our client success engineers, and he is going to be providing the technical support and demo support during our session today. We want this to be an engaging session, so ask lots of questions. You can use the question and answer panel in your GoToWebinar toolbar. We'll also launch a quick poll before we kick off into the content, and then there's just a quick 3-question survey at the end once you exit out of this webinar. If you don't mind participating in that, just helps us make the sessions more meaningful and compelling for you all in the future. So what we're going to be covering, we will look at the scope and complexity of the issue. So of course, we're focusing on troubleshooting remote workers in Citrix environments. So we want to look at the scope and complexity of the problem, and then we're going to dig right into use cases and demos. So we're going to, not a lot of slideware for this. We're going to jump right into technology and real stories and real use cases. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So again, if you've got questions at any point, go ahead and put them into the question and answer panel in the GoToWebinar toolbar. In many cases, we can answer them in real time if it's applicable to the topic being discussed, and we'll certainly try to do that. And of course, if there's anything we can't answer or run out of time to answer, we'll follow up with you on those. All right, so before we jump right into the content, we're going to go ahead and launch a quick poll. All right, here we go. What is the most challenging part of troubleshooting remote worker issues for you all? And this is a multiple selected. There's certainly no one answer. Platform limitations only let me put in 5 selections. I know there's probably a myriad of additional selections that aren't there, but just trying to get an idea of if it's things around connectivity issues, maybe there's issues that you suspect are user behavior as the root cause of problems, but you don't have a way to prove it. Is it on the client side or server side? Understanding the actual user experience versus what they say their experience is, and then understanding the frequency and duration of issues. Is it really happening as often for as long as the users are saying? So just another few seconds. All right, we're going to go ahead and close this up. Oh, we've got almost everyone participating. Good job, guys. Good job. All right, here we go. Here's our results. There we go. So it's pretty evenly spread, and my guess is, and I can't tell from this view, but my guess is most of you have selected multiple, if not all of these. So this will be really, really good as we get into the content. You're going to hear some stories from John as he shares how he leverages technology to help resolve some of these issues. So with that said, let's just go ahead and jump right on in. So John, Thomas, do you guys want to come in and sort of set the stage? Tell us under what circumstances that this relationship was actually forged.
Sure. Why don't I start off with a couple of points to share with the audience. So when we put the webinar together, Kiri, the team, and John, we first started talking, we constructed the webinar for an audience that is contending with remote worker issues specifically, right? They're incredibly complex. They're large in scope because essentially everyone's a remote worker these days. And so what we wanted to do was, in terms of an outcome or a goal for the webinar, is to have everyone leave with the knowledge that there is technology out there that's probably less expensive than you think, a lot easier to use than you think, that can help resolve remote worker issues permanently and give you the ability to use data to not only resolve the issues, but to communicate with your end users, with other counterparts within the organization, possibly even to justify an expenditure to have issues solved permanently. So that's what our goals are for the webinar. Hopefully you share those. And so I thought we'd introduce the technology, though, against a backdrop of John Bennett's story and how he started working with us. I think, John, it was what, like five, 6 years ago or something like that, right?
Oh, it might be even longer than that, I think. Could be up to 10, I think. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been working with Citrix for about 25 years in delivering solutions, back when it was WinFrame and MetaFrame and so on, so all the way through to cloud these days. The last 20 years, though, I've been really using Citrix to deliver our project control solutions, such as Oracle P6 and others. And it's really important to provide a consistent experience. Everybody's, as you were saying, Thomas, everybody's remote from the data center. They could be on multiple different laptops and networks and endpoints and so on. We really want to make sure that we can get people on using the solutions really easily and back out again quickly as well. So that's where we were working together, because before we were kind of in a gray area or in a black spots, because we would be delivering a solution to hundreds of users, but one person might call up and say, I'm having a bad time, and we wouldn't know where to go at that point, because we were dealing with perception at that stage. One person was saying it was bad, others were being quiet, but we didn't quite know where the truth was in all of that. So that's where Thomas and I started working together to say, what extra insight could you guys give us above the Citrix platform to when I'm delivering P6 to my users, that we can identify the good and the bad performance of that and actually troubleshoot into the solution. So yeah, that's where we came from. Yeah, probably 10 years now, I think. So yeah, Thomas.
And John, P6, can you talk a little bit about the criticality of the application that you're delivering, and if people don't have access and good speed and reliability when using the application, what sort of problems that causes?
Yeah, absolutely. And for many people who are running large, complex capital infrastructure projects, P6 is the tool they're using all day long. There are people in organizations who their job is to make sure that the critical path of all of these mega projects are running on time, running on their scope and so on.
This is an Oracle product, right?
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, so any disruption is really frustrating. You'll be heading into the schedule, dealing with hundreds and thousands of millions of data points, and if you get cut off or the session resets, you've got to go back and think, where did I leave? Well, how do I redo that work when I'm also got other users in the same project at the same time? Have I now done something that I need to redo or undo? It can be a really frustrating experience if you're not being able to rely on the application being available.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so why don't we talk a little bit about some of the issues that you encountered, and Kiri, if you could advance the slide a little bit. And I think what we can do, John, and Martin, is go back and forth between the product and the use cases, and maybe leverage the product to show how John's able to solve some of these use cases. I think the first issue, John, is one you brought up in your example, where when issues do occur, in the absence of data, you have to listen to who's screaming the loudest, right? And we lost the presentation.
Yeah, I switched it over to Martin so he can jump into the product.
Okay, so I'll try to remember that slide. But so when the problems first occur, it's a matter of understanding, how do we frame it up, right? Is it a loud problem? Is it a broad issue? John, can you give us a little bit of that from your experience?
Yeah, exactly. And this is where Martin can start showing you some of the products here, because we were, as I was kind of mentioning just now, we would be delivering to hundreds of users. But in one example that comes to mind is we had one site who were very critical to the process. They were all experiencing poor performance and basically saying the whole thing wasn't working. When we knew that we were providing this very well to other parts of the same organization or so on, and it was really how do we break that perception? And it was really getting quite visible to upper management that this just wasn't working. What we were providing in terms of reports, how the users were really complaining because they were frustrated, as I was mentioning. We were kind of hitting an impasse here. We couldn't get through it. So when we introduced Goliath into the tools, and we were able to then look at some of the session statistics and the latency, the bandwidth, and the screens that Martin's going to take you through in a second, we were able to then take that into the meeting and say, look, this is the bandwidth you're providing. This is the dropouts that your network is giving you. I can now hand this over to you. You can see the times of the day, the days of the week where this network is just not providing you the reliability you need to deliver this critical application. Because for anyone who does work with Citrix, it's very intolerant to that kind of poor network, poor latency. So yeah, Goliath brought those screens. We took those into the meeting. We showed the local IT, the local network people, guys, can you explain this? Can you explain at this time of day this was dropping out? What was happening here? Was it a Wi-Fi reset or something? Did a user take their laptop out of a network connection and go into a Wi-Fi zone? What happened? What happened? And Goliath would show all of those changes, the changing of the IP address, the various different versions of the Citrix software that they're running on their PCs, and we were able to break that down. So what could have been quite a difficult meeting was over very quickly, because we just had the fact other than the feelings to push us a way forward here. So that was really a good bonus for us, and it shows a real benefit of Goliath. Yeah, Martin, if you want to show some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing that kind of use case, that story. Obviously, an extremely impactful use case of some of the data that Goliath will provide. So what you all are seeing here is just one of our reports, specifically one around Citrix fault isolation. What this is doing is helping you to inject objective data into a largely subjective conversation. As you were just bringing up, John, right? A lot of the complaints that might come from users, and as Thomas mentioned, some of the understanding of whether an issue is potentially having a broad impact or just a large impact on a few users. This is the type of data that can help you to cut through that noise and understand, again, from a objective perspective, where an issue lies. So you're seeing in this iteration, which came from one of our recent customers here, a total of over 10,000 users evaluated with their objective experience in Citrix. Then being able to compare their actual experience with things like latency in session, network impacts specifically on the Citrix session as opposed to just general network impacts, as well as things like the amount of connectivity that those sessions have access to, allowing you to see that just 1,200 of the 10,000 users total in the environment were actually experiencing issues. And looking even closer, breaking this down by user, we can understand who is being impacted, the general frequency and duration of those issues based on when we evaluate those sessions, as well as the most likely root cause, allowing us to identify, say in this example, that our users who are being most severely impacted are not only just 5 or 6 out of the 10,000, but are our most important users from a particular department who are all working on a particular local wireless access point to their office. This allowing us to quickly identify where an issue is coming from, in this specific case indicating something like a network location, but also various data points such as client devices in use, maybe outdated devices in some cases, outdated workspace versions for Citrix, etc. I can show this as well in the product if we'd like, and maybe walk through some troubleshooting use cases if that would be helpful. But as far as the overall view here, is this, John, about what you were
Yeah,
leveraging for
I mean, you
something?
can take us a bit more into that product and look at some of the individual sessions to show the. So if we drill down into, say, the first user here, for example, this what Martin's about to show you is exactly the data I took into that meeting, for example. So if we drill into one of those sort of poor reporting sessions, we can then go in and have a look at that individual session here. And this is, for me, this is then the true kind of the power of Goliath for that particular story here. Because when I could go into the ICA tab at the top here, I can then ask that local IT team to explain this. Why was I getting this great speed and then low speed? Why was I getting great performance and then high latency? What happened, guys? Because I was providing that consistently, but this endpoint had a dropout, and as Martin, as you hover over, you can see exactly the minute and the second that happened. So that's the key. I can then take that data out to those local IT guys to say, guys, what happened here? Because I can show you another user that had great performance. What happened at this site in this IP address range or this set of users or department or whatever? And yeah, this was a really important set of charts for us in our real world in scenarios. So yeah, back to you, Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. So walking through the data that you might use here, and John, just as you described, right, it's very common for our customers to take, say, screenshots of particular timestamps and data points into other teams, where then you can better coordinate, again, using the objective data, where a lot of our customers would otherwise say, maybe they have a hunch that the issue is tracking to the local client connectivity or the general network where the users are working from, right? And so injecting the objective data here tends to be extremely important, where we can share those specific timeframes and better coordinate for faster resolution. You'll see within each session that Goliath collects, you'll see in the background here, a full historical database of all of those sessions, allowing us to quickly identify, say, when a user was experiencing issues and compare things like their location, device, application that they're accessing to potentially find the failure point in a session. And within 1 to 2 clicks, being able to get into a session, understand those high-level data points, such as, again, that location, workspace version, responsible infrastructure, but also the key performance of how was the session itself performing. Understanding something like a client side versus a server side issue tends to be a major use case for our customers. And so being able to do so in a single glance and as little as 1 to 2 clicks is extremely helpful for identifying root cause and reducing time to remediation. You'll see in this sort of example, being able to understand if this user were to call in about slowness in session, we can quickly identify things like the latency experienced by this user. With comparison against industry best practices, with those cautionary and critical threshold lines, we can understand exactly when and where in a session a user is having an issue, and then be able to quickly glance and understand that right around that same time, due to the correlated data that we have here to the exact time frame of the user's session, we can track this issue toward the network and quickly reference things like the server performance and underlying infrastructure to identify whether or not that is contributing to an issue for this user.
So for context here, what is it that we're troubleshooting?
Yeah,
so this is a remote worker, and we're trying to understand the root cause of the issue.
Exactly. This would be the type of situation where if you receive a ticket about a user who's experiencing slowness in their session, right? My application is slow is a very common complaint we'll get from our customers, will get from their end users, and especially those working in remote scenarios. It can be extremely hard to identify where the issue is coming from. Again, even a majority of you answering the poll at the top of this session, trying to identify things like client-side connectivity or in-session behavior as root cause for these sessions. And so being able to track this, again, in a single glance, something like slowness in session, exactly when that was being experienced, as well as when it wasn't. Again, you can see those sort of cautionary and critical threshold lines in the session to help interpret that data, but also tracking this down to something like the network, which allows us to go to the relevant tab for that data. Now a dedicated view in the session here to help you quickly and easily understand where an issue was coming from. So seeing things like in-session latency and understanding how this correlates with the network impacts on the Citrix session. I'll note that this network latency is unique to Citrix in the fact that this is tracking the actual Citrix session data, the network impacts on that individual user's connection from their device at their location to the data center where the Citrix session hosts are residing. We can see exactly how large of an impact and when those impacts are being experienced, as well as get to root cause by identifying something like client-side connectivity in the very next graph over to the right here. Seeing the exact amount of connectivity that Citrix has available to it on the client device at the client location over the course of the session. You can see very quickly here, again with those caution and critical threshold lines in this case, that when the user is experiencing issues is exactly when they're experiencing a sudden drop in connectivity and where we do not have access, or Citrix does not have access to enough data or bandwidth to support a satisfactory Citrix experience. So this giving you the objective data for a user's complaint to understand exactly where the slowness is coming from, and at the point where the user would be complaining, that we have client-side connectivity at their location as a root cause to now investigate. Very commonly taking screenshots and having a conversation with other teams.
What's interesting about what you've been showing, Martin, and John, what you shared sort of in the first use case, just looking for that empirical evidence and cutting through the noise.
Yep.
What Martin showed in the beginning was that scorecard, the fault isolation analytics. You didn't actually have that available to you when you were trying to solve that problem. And so being able to go in multiple ways into the solution to find what you need to be able to help resolve issues becomes really, really important.
Yeah, Martin, can you pull the use cases back up real quickly?
Sure.
John, you were about to say something. Sorry.
Oh, exactly. It's different information for different types of audiences, right? So the scorecard's great as a quick snapshot, isn't it? And it's good for management to see that. But you know, when you go into an IT call, they want to see the detail, right? So we've used the Goliath tool to go right into those sessions, as Martin was just taking you through there. So yeah, we can go keep high or we can go low.
So maybe when it comes to, so that sort of gives you the ability to prove where the problem is, maybe where the problem isn't. Let's talk a little bit about isolating the root cause then. So somebody says, okay, now we know that maybe it's not 10,000 users that are having a problem. Maybe it's only 1,200, which is still plenty. 1,200 users that are having an issue. How do we isolate the root cause, and not just isolate it, but prove the root cause? And some of the common ones are, hey, Citrix is slow, or the application is slow, right? What they typically blame what the application is, right? Or whatever they see on the screen, right? If it's Citrix, whatever the application is, Oracle, etc. So how do we prove that where the issue is? And one of the three common ones that we end up, I think, getting challenged as IT folks is, hey, is it on the client side or the server side? Because they blame, obviously, most of the blame falls on either Citrix or the data center. And I know we all have sort of a gut feeling that they might be using Citrix the wrong way, right? There might be a user behavior issue, or proving, hey, look, here's some data that it's your home office. Do you run into those, John? And I know that we've talked about these before.
Yeah,
we can have,
exactly.
Then Martin jump into the product and show how we're.
Yeah, it's a sort of a frequently reported issue, right? My kids are watching Disney Plus. That's fine. I can access my email. That's fine. Your Citrix is one that's dropping out, and they users will typically try and diagnose that themselves. They'll say, well, yes, I can get to my Amazon. That's okay, but they forget that Citrix is quite a different type of delivery here, where I'm actually reading and writing at the same time. I'm expecting this to be a responsive application, not just some kind of streaming video. So yeah, it's typically over the last few years where more and more people have been working from home or coffee shops or work sites or wherever. It's again going back to that. How do we provide a consistent experience? Because we want them to be able to have the same performance, whether they're at the work sites talking to the engineer when they're constructing something using P6 to plan that, or they're back in the office and they're trying to think ahead and forecast their future needs. So they want that consistency. And again, without the insight that Goliath brings, you're always fighting that perception, because their home internet is working for, as I say, for video or the news or for watching sports or whatever. But yeah, Citrix just has higher requirements and higher needs, and we show that here. So yeah, over to you, Martin.
I don't know if you see this, but it does seem to be interesting, right? That we're supposed to be a society that's become even more technically savvy. However, people don't seem to understand that the connectivity you're getting on a train, a plane, a coffee shop, or a farm somewhere is just going to be different than when you're either in the office or even at your home. So it's we constantly contend with that. So Martin, can you run through a couple of these, starting with I guess the first bullet point around being able to really quickly, you're the IT person, John's team is getting a ticket saying there are problems, and trying to identify immediately where to look,
Absolutely.
client side, server side, etc.
In a lot of cases, when it comes to troubleshooting user experience in Goliath here, it's extremely easy to tell exactly where an issue might be coming from in terms of something like the client side versus the server side by nature of how we pull in this data. So within every session, you'll see us clicking in.
Just real quickly, for those people not familiar with the product, how did you get here?
Sure.
So the ticket comes in, Joe Smith is saying they're having an issue.
Sure, yeah. So within Goliath, you'll have a tab in the product designed for troubleshooting, allowing you to get down to root cause in as little time as possible. You'll see this is the Views tab for, in this case, Citrix published apps and desktops. And let's say a user calls in or you receive a ticket from a particular user. We can always sort and filter through our sessions, and in this case, maybe search a particular user who submitted a ticket. In this case, we have all sorts of data from their experience, things like average latency that they're experiencing. So if the user is complaining about slowness, we can use this as an indicator for when this user is having the most amount of slowness. If we're worried about things like connectivity, we can pull in these metrics or just about anything that would be common cases for your environment. If you would want to see things like server performance, network performance, any of those metrics can absolutely be pulled into this view. Once you find a session that correlates, let's say, with the time frame of a user's complaint, a lot of times we'll have users who complain about, hey, I've been having this issue since last week, right? And of course, it can be extremely hard to get access to that data, especially in things like non-persistent environments where data may not be available anymore past a few hours after the user session. Goliath's going to retain all this information in a historical fashion, so we can go to exactly when a user was having an issue and correlate root cause, as well as associated pieces, such as where the user was working from. So identifying if a user's slowest sessions all seem to happen from a particular location. Maybe it's an external IP address where the user's at their home office. Maybe it's internal and we're tracking an issue to a particular wireless access point. We'll be able to track exactly where a Citrix session is coming from and how that seems to impact their in-session performance. Again, maybe things like whenever a user uses their personal MacBook that they haven't updated the Citrix Workspace app on in a while, we see poor performance. We can very quickly and easily make those correlations from this view, but also within each and every session. You can get full granular detail to get down to the exact root cause. So clicking into a particular session here and seeing things like if the user complained about slowness, we may want to take a look at something like latency in session. This is the exact amount of true user latency experienced, or lag that the user might describe here, that was experienced throughout the session. We can see in magnitudes here of 3.5 full seconds of latency for that user every time they click or type a character, anything to respond on their screen. This may come in as a complaint in a ticket of a user saying, my Citrix session is freezing, right? If we often hear that sort of a complaint. Then understanding where this issue is coming from is as easy as looking at the various trend lines that are all correlated to the exact time the user was logged into the session to the very moment they logged out or disconnected from the session. We can see things like the server that the user was on, its overall performance in terms of processing, memory consumption, even drive space and such are all trended and correlated to this session within the various tabs along the top, depending on the correlating factor here. In this particular case, we can see off the bat that something like CPU consumption does not seem to be a large impact at the time of this user's main issue. However, something that does correlate in almost exactly is the network here. So now we know exactly where to go. Again, one click into troubleshooting, we know where to go, and all of the rest of the data can be found in a single click here, going into the user session, now relevant to the tab here. At this point, we'll be able to identify where the slowness was coming from. Was it the network that the user was coming in on? Was it where they were working from? Or was it even something like what they were doing within the session? All of that's available on this tab, looking at things like the network impact that's particular to the Citrix ICA traffic, the amount of bandwidth that the Citrix Workspace app on the client device at the client location is able to access, as well as even trending things like user behavior by virtue of the virtual channels that exist within the Citrix protocol, breaking down if the user was leveraging, say, graphics within the session, copy and paste jobs, dictation, or maybe a video call that's going in and out of the session. As John, as you mentioned, right, this Citrix is a very different technology, not necessarily buffering or streaming in the same way that users' other applications may perform. And so that inbound and outbound is going to be critically important for understanding when the user was attempting to do something in the session and how Citrix was able to handle that based on environmental conditions or overall impacts on the network, as well as things like the server within the session.
Hey, John, quick question for you. If someone submits a ticket, you're getting, and they're a remote worker, and they're complaining of slowness, what is your hunch? Like, before you ever open up Goliath, you just got the ticket, what's your hunch that the issue is?
Well, yeah, nowadays we go straight into Goliath, but yeah, typically where I'm sitting in kind of my application space is that, I know that the application is probably performing pretty well. So it's where's the infrastructure sort of impacts of this? Is it the end user? Is it the network? Is it the Citrix server? Or is it some underlying storage performance or something else? Because again, we know that maybe 80% of the users are okay. I can log in okay. For example, I can get good performance. So those are the things I'll do, but I'll be going straight into Goliath pretty quickly.
So Martin, can you go back to that summary screen that you first opened up? This is part of what right here. Perfect. This is what's so powerful, because John is, this ticket is escalated to John or, someone on his team. They have a hunch that it's probably network or connectivity. Right from this screen, scroll down a little bit. You scrolled up a little bit. There you go. Right from this screen on the left side there, you can see the spike in network latency and the drop in connection speed, all right there. So while you can go into a lot of the other places, Martin, that you were showing that we can get like really into the details, this right here gets you to the answer pretty much right away. Then you can dig right into that HDX tab and go right to the connection and see exactly what's happening. And that's the real power of it. Like, all of those other aspects are fantastic when you've got to really drill into it. But the answer was staring us right in the face. And so when you've got a hunch like that with a remote worker that it's connection side, now it's real easy to prove this is actually on the client side. It's not on the server side. I can look and validate and verify in some of the other aspects to see that, but I can see right away from the very first screen that there's a drop in connection speed. Let's look at that because it coincides with the network latency. And that's a real easy way to prove client side versus server side.
And because Goliath is watching all this all the time anyway as well, and we're going to come back to monitoring rules a bit later on, but now with the dashboards and the scorecards you guys produce, I can be already looking for my top 5, poor experienced people. They may just be not reporting it. They may, sometimes this happens in delivering solutions. People just get complacent. They think it's bad, but they think it's always bad. There's no point reporting it because it will never get fixed. But actually, what we do is we use these tools to say, show me the top 5 people that are having the lowest connection speeds, for example. So we then proactively go out and say, guys, you must be having a problem. Why are you not reporting it? Let's work together and fix this. So again, we don't just react. We move into that proactive place, and we'll come back to more of that later.
And I think, John, you pointed out to me, or we were talking about the complementary nature of some of these metrics, especially around network latency, in that this is not the network latency that you would get for the network tools that you have. This is the network latency as it relates to the Citrix channel and the availability of network for the Citrix users, right? So in every network, they have to put quality of service settings in place, right? And from time to time, things can happen where Citrix users need additional bandwidth, right? Or they've increased the number of Citrix users and the bandwidth is now no longer adequate for the number of Citrix users. And that's what this reading is, right? So and I think we talked about this talking to the network team, where everything is fine pretty much all the time, but definitely everything is fine. And then you find out that the network is actually the issue, but it's not the network overall, but rather the amount of bandwidth available to Citrix in specific, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we see that often. Okay, when we're delivering this over long distances and different networks, that quality of service on Citrix can have a big impact. And again, these empirical facts just help move the conversation on.
So when we're troubleshooting, moving down the bullet points around isolating root cause, we talk about user behavior, which is a really sort of an issue that's very interesting. And we give some really interesting detail, but it's difficult to prove otherwise. And when we say user behavior, we don't mean just that users are using Citrix inappropriately to watch videos or things like that during work hours, though that does happen. We're talking about understanding what they're using in their Citrix session that might be causing slowness. Martin, can you dig into that a little bit and if you could, John, do you have an example of this?
Well, let's go through the screens. But yeah, this.
Yeah, I can go ahead and kind of just lay out what we're seeing here in session. So this is something automatically collected by Goliath in every single Citrix session, is user behavior via those virtual channels in Citrix. So everything the user does, from speaking or listening to audio to turning on their camera and passing in a video signal, or watching a video or pulling up applications, maybe even graphics processing is a popular use case in some of our design applications, right? Copy and paste jobs from between applications or between the client device and Citrix, as well as you'll see a host of other metrics always in use in Citrix sessions depending on those users' activity. Things like print jobs and large file shares, as well as even external devices, all of which is you'll see an input and an output to that session. This can all be thought of as far as input to the session, such as a user speaking into a call, versus output versus a user listening to a call. All of this directional, such that we can understand exactly what a user is doing. And say, for example, if we have a spike in graphics, which is the thin wire bandwidth here, coming out of the session, we know that this user is from the application requesting a large amount of graphics, be that in the form of video or high fidelity signal in session. We recently saw this at a customer in one of the healthcare environments that we work in, specifically with an application update, where there was an increased resolution on the in-session recordings that the clinicians were able to do, which in turn caused an increase in graphics coming out of the session, looking much like this graph you're seeing here. A large spike that, with the QoS settings and those quality of service provisions that the network team had in place, were actually not sufficient to support the increased resolution. The note was never passed to the network team since it was buried in a list of enhancements, mostly around things like security when the application was updated. But coming into Goliath with user complaints about slowness whenever they were trying to view their recordings and images, we're able to see metrics such as graphics taking up a lot of that data, as well as things like the network responding in a poor fashion whenever those requests went through. So being able to correlate that, John, I'm not sure if you have a similar experience or maybe a different relevant experience with those virtual channels.
Yeah, exactly. And again, if you think about as I was explaining, the P6 is like, so users are in an application just like that, where they're entering their data. They're going to need to print that off. These project plans can be quite large, multiple pages of either PDF content or straight to printer, or they may be exporting that to an Excel file or something, some kind of export. Again, by seeing the data here, we can say, oh, someone was trying to export their data. And again, as you were saying there, Martin, maybe there wasn't enough bandwidth to handle the export, but actually just using the graphics was fine in that example. So again, we can fine tune to say, did you by any chance try to print a large file at that time? Oh, okay, maybe I did. And drilling down those behaviors helps us understand the issues, because obviously when you ask people, what did you do? They go, oh, I was just doing normal things. But now we say, but did you also print at the same time? And then we can get down to the next conversation. Yeah, really useful.
And how does this, maybe we can, I think right from here, we can talk a little bit about the home office environment, can we not? So
we absolutely can.
We talked earlier, the whole notion of being able to isolate root cause and have a kind of a data-driven conversation with somebody and prove to them that their home office is actually the home office environment, if you will, is the culprit here, or where they need to look to adjust things is kind of a challenging conversation, especially if the only way to prove that is to put technology on the endpoint, right? And our technology, there's nothing that you put on the endpoint here with Goliath. So without having them put something on the endpoint, you still have the ability to have this dialogue with them.
Yeah, well, that's a really critical part of how Goliath works, right? Martin, if you want to take that forward, that when we're doing all of this, we're not deploying any new software out there on our end users. We're asking them to use Workspace, to use the applications as they always did. We're drilling into that data, right? So.
Yeah, you've got it exactly right, John. Just simply integrate with exactly how Citrix operates and look down the pipeline at a user session from your data center to understand all of the metrics that Citrix already passes internally to govern its behavior. There, we're able to grab it, trend it, and store it historically so we can understand exactly how Citrix was behaving directly in any user experience.
And that's the other thing that I like, again, with Goliath is that many of our customers will perhaps even store a year's worth of data. Sometimes it's just a few months. But what they can do is, as Martin, you've been showing, is by having that historical data, you can then start seeing those trends. You can then start, and as you were explaining, someone might say, last Tuesday it was bad. Without this, I'd struggle to wind back the time. Now I can go back into last Tuesday and see exactly what he did, and then work out whether that was a difference in network location or the version, or again, he used his child's laptop for a backup for some reason, and he didn't think to report that when he logged the issue. We can go in and see all of that and see everything was great, then it was bad, and then we can see, well, what happened there, and then if it does restore, then we've got all of that good and bad records all in our database, so we control how long we keep that for.
Exactly, and that tends to be extremely powerful where, say, for example, we have a hybrid worker, right? Someone who works from their home office 2 days a week, Monday and Friday, right? And so when that complaint comes in of Citrix is slow, we can very quickly and easily pull in, say, 3 or 4 weeks, multiple months worth of data even, and quickly sort by things like average slowness, or even filter the in-session performance by location, where then we're able to see that, say, for example, whenever the user works from a particular IP address corresponding with their home office, on every Monday and every Thursday, we see their slowest performance. So then being able to see exactly when that user is experiencing issues, and many times when I'm working this with our customers, we'll see this as almost blocks of data. The first 10 or so sessions, right, showing that home location as the correlating factor for the worst performance in session. And whenever they're hardwired in their office, they have a great performance. And so then that finger pointing becomes part of the conversation without objective data like this to guide that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're regularly patching the applications, so there's regular maintenance. People may not even have a poor performance change, but they will see something has changed in the communication we've sent out. The patch has gone in, and if someone even is more sensitive to the issue, will think there's an issue. Now we know before and after the service is exactly the same. We worked with one organization who had a massive wide area network upgrade, and they were really worried about having 10,000 people complain on the Monday morning, things are worse. And without the historical data that we've just been showing you, we couldn't show a before and an after without Goliath. So it would have been such a time-consuming, challenging conversation to have with so many people on that Monday morning. We completely removed the concerns because we had all of this great data going back the last 6 months. The WAN upgrade came in. Luckily, we had no issues anyway, but should there have been, we had all of this empirical evidence to back us up. So we felt really confident going into this that we were still providing the same service. And anytime that, as I said, anytime there's an upgrade or a patch, we're again capturing all of this historically. So we've always got the points in time to say, well, let's go back pre-patch, post-patch. Have we done anything? Has the network seen more demand, or has the user behavior changed in a new feature? Again, as Martin was just showing you there. So yeah, really valuable stuff for us.
And John, you were talking a little bit about how you use the technology proactively as well to anticipate issues before. We're talking a lot about troubleshooting, but you also use the technology to anticipate issues before they happen. And I think you had a really great story about this. Maybe Martin, you could show that part of the product, and John, you could talk a little bit about that.
Exactly. So in our time of working together, we've talked about some of the original kind of hot topics, why we needed to work with Goliath on those point problems that by having Goliath resolved, that then meant us, freed us up to have more future, more better proactive conversations. So now we've put out all those fires. Now we're saying, well, how do we stop them happening again? So within Goliath, we've gone into the monitoring rules capability there, where we then set thresholds. We work with the Goliath support teams to say what makes sense in terms of our infrastructure. Can we establish a baseline around memory utilization, disk performance, session connection speed, all the great settings that Martin was just showing you through, and then putting in some rules to be then alerting us in advance of these things happening. So when I'm delivering, say, this P6 application, people will log in at 8 in the morning and will just stay connected all day. It doesn't matter how much more resource you throw at that person, they're going to have the same experience all day long. But another 20 users come on, they're going to consume other session hosts, and eventually there might not be enough session hosts to run the demand. So I'm configuring monitoring rules here to watch the overall health of all the servers, and I'm saying that you can see the user demand increasing over during the day, and then you can start saying, if I don't do anything, then I might run out of capacity at say 4 o'clock. So what I'll do is I'll power up another server, and then I'll have enough capacity to reach that demand, so that then no user is then affected. And there's some really great insight again that through, as Martin's showing you on the screen here, configuring the monitoring rules that then suits your requirements just removes those unknowns happening, because in our cases we're avoiding these problems all the time because we're actively managing our capacity. We're not just over provisioning just in case, or worried that we haven't provisioned enough. We're getting this, giving us real-time insights. So yeah, really useful. And Martin, if you want to just take us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a lot of our customers will leverage things like the monitoring rules, which are really that proactive piece of the technology that's going to help notify you in advance of a user having to report an issue, right? So say, for example, John, just as you mentioned, noticing an increase in demand on a server, understanding how that impacts your resource utilization, for example, by baselining over time, which we could do with our reporting, some of the data in the technology, and then creating a baseline structure such that if we exceed that, we could, say, for example, execute a remediation action to execute on, say, the broker delivery controller to spin up another machine. Maybe we'll want to send a ticket via a ticketing system, or maybe just email to a particular distribution group where we can be notified about that issue and immediately take action, or even document the frequency of a particular issue so that we can get ahead of user experience problems. This is extremely common within the user experience data as well, just as you mentioned, things like documenting when users hit critical thresholds of low connectivity, right? Or when those users experience high levels of network latency. Them being able to pass this out via, say, our reporting, or again, the notifications to ticketing systems to quickly pull out, say, the frequent flyers who's constantly experiencing low connectivity. Then be able to pull that data and say, route this to tier 1 help desk. Include things like resolution notes with every alert to search for the affected user, find and identify root cause just in the few clicks that we were just covering. Or say, for example, in something like a more complicated resource utilization issue, maybe some more instructions, such as things like identify the trend lines coming from some of our historical data, flag high consuming processes, or even escalate to a particular team, where we can build in all of these workflows to reduce the escalation points of any issues, as well as even reduce the need for intervention in some cases, leveraging automatic remediation.
The other part I like about this as well is it's really a one-stop kind of screen for me, because I'm also using your tool to look at the monitoring rules on my database server, my file server as well. So I've got your agents on all those other non-Citrix components of the service as well, and I'm monitoring the health of all of that as well. So you guys can tell me about processor queue length and disk I/O performance. And again, if I'm seeing high spikes on disks on storage, that might be related to that connection issue or whatever. So again, I've moved away from being that firefighter to now avoiding them in the first place with the monitoring rules. So yeah, really good use case.
All right, I'm gonna pop back in. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are coming up on time. We have way more questions than we're actually gonna have the ability to get to, but I'm gonna go ahead and take the screen back if you don't mind, Martin. All right. So you guys have been really active in the question and answer panel. Really appreciate that. We've clearly hit a hot topic. We've struck a nerve with remote workers. This is clearly a pain point, and we have quite a few questions in here. Like I said at the beginning, anything that we don't get to, we'll certainly follow up with you afterwards. And I can assure you we won't get to all the questions that you guys have put in here. But let's go ahead and jump right into them. John, this is probably a best suited question for you, since you're sort of the agnostic one on here. This question is really looking at Citrix viability in the future. So a lot of vendors are moving towards cloud and SaaS. Do you see Citrix as being viable moving forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, absolutely. As all these vendors, as I keep mentioning P6 today, but there's many others in this project control space that I work in. They're all moving towards a software subscription model or whatever. But nearly always the case is there's still some kind of desktop deployment. It's either a specific rule on the browser, or it's a piece of software that needs to be installed somewhere. So we're always talking about how do we make that easier? Do we go down a packaging route or some kind of manual install? We always want to avoid that. So that's why Citrix is really still a viable option in many cases. And then therefore, the Goliath is essential. So yeah, even though the market's moving, there's still a need for that. All of what we just talked about, providing a consistent experience, right? You'll be maybe having 1,000 SaaS users. How do you make sure that they're all having the same good time? So
Yeah,
it's already useful.
so there's still some security aspects, some peripheral support, other integrations that still aren't matched to other platforms. While the market is larger and growing now, and shifting as we've all been experiencing, there's still a solid place there. Next question, John, is actually addressed towards you as well. This was someone that just was trying to better understand how it is you're leveraging it. Are you providing a managed service for the Oracle application?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we take a whole life approach to the project controls tools that we deliver. So we will come in and we'll understand the requirements. We'll design and build and configure the applications. We'll work with partners like yourselves to make sure that the service is being supported and monitored well, and we'll then look after them for the life of their needs. So upgrades and patching and housekeeping and support is all what we do. So that's why you guys are so important to us.
Have you seen a reduction in resolution time?
Yeah, because as I was saying there, so rather than necessarily reducing the resolution time, which obviously we can because we go straight deep dive into those statistics, and we're not fighting the perception issues, but we're also even avoiding them happening as well. So yeah, that's as we've been saying for the last hour. This is all good stuff.
Martin, I'm gonna toss this next question to you, even though John, I heard a little bit where you kind of touched on this. Does Goliath, Martin, require any sort of agent on the endpoints?
Yeah, great question. So it does not require anything deployed to your endpoint technology. So whether you're using thin clients, thick clients, Windows, anything like that, we're completely agnostic. We leverage everything that's in place in terms of something like a Citrix workspace that's already deployed. You already put in the effort to deploy that. We won't require any additional technology. We'll all be on the data center side.
Okay. We've got time for one more question. We probably won't have time to show it, but I do at least want to make sure that we get it answered. There was some talk about proactive alerting. Do we have anything by the way of synthetic monitoring for logging on to applications? Martin, we'll kick that over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody was glancing around the screen, it is available right within the Goliath console, and that is the application availability feature, which really serves as an early warning system to log on from any of your locations, physical, virtual, regions, cloud locations, pretty much anything, on any schedule to make sure that Citrix is up and available. And just like any of our other proactive features, be able to notify your teams, submit tickets, anything like that if ever there's a problem.
Okay.
We've used that too before as well, so maybe that's a separate session to talk about all the benefits that GAN
absolutely provides. No, absolutely. Just real quick as we wrap up, and again, we will follow up with every one of the questions that came in, and there are still a lot. Just wanted to let you all know that we do offer a fully supported trial or POC, however you want to view it, 30 to 60 days. It takes less than 2 hours to get production ready. We'll include operational use sessions, and we'll look at measurable outcomes. So are you actually identifying and resolving issues? What are the actual end user experience scores? And we're also going to include an automated Citrix health check as well. And if there's anybody that is just looking for some troubleshooting services, we can certainly do that. So there are links in the chat for you if you are interested in a demo or a trial taking advantage of this. We're happy to help you out in that arena. Just as we wrap up quickly, our next masterclass is going to be on March 19th, again, focused on Citrix. And we're going to be looking at the top 3 Citrix end user experience issues in 2025. So make sure that you guys register for that. You're part of the series already, so you should get some notifications on that as well. And then we do have a post-webinar survey, like I said, just to help ensure that we're making this session as meaningful for you all as possible. John, thank you so much for your time. Love to hear all the use cases and the stories. Thomas, thank you as well for jumping on the session. And for everybody that joined us, we appreciate you taking the time today. And again, we'll follow up with everybody who had questions that went unanswered. Thank you all for joining, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, John.
Thanks all.